Ah, yes. We shall continue on with our progression through the book of Genesis. Ending off in 6, we had Noah crafting an ark, a giant boat, a bit of a raft, and he's going to be using that to preserve the animals as well as the human race. His family will survive. Genesis 7:1. And the Lord said to Noah, come with all your household into the ark, for I have seen you to be righteous, upright, and in right standing before me in this generation. It's a kind of a wicked generation, very violent and just unruly and just wicked, wicked. Not good, not a good situation. So, God's going to have to do something about that. Genesis 7:2. Of every clean beast you shall receive, and take with you 7 pairs, the male and its mate, and the beasts that are not clean, a pair of each kind, the male and its his mate. When it talks about clean and unclean, we get into that later on, and I think it's like Leviticus, where it's like, well, how do you determine if an animal's clean or unclean? And you get like the splitting of the hoof and the chewing of the cud and a bunch of other stuff. But we'll get into that later. Let's just move on. Genesis 7:3. Also of the birds of the air, 7 pairs, the male and the female, to keep seed, their kind alive over all the earth and the land. So a lot of the birds, it's like if there was no land, they would die. So they need to be preserved on the ark. They couldn't just fly around forever or land or whatever. They're going to be eaten by sharks. So they're going to have a nice safe place to hang out on the boat. And that'll be good for them. And we get into this like 7 pairs of clean and, you know, I guess it was for the birds, it was all 7 pairs, but in the animals, we had the unclean only being 1 pair. I don't know why that is, but there's usually significance to numbers when it comes to the Bible. So, you know, the number 7 kind of comes up a lot. There's a whole numerology thing in that, and I mean, you can look into it. It is interesting, but we're not going to be diving into that. Diving off the boat? No, we're not going to be going into that in this casual walk. Same with the line that we have coming up here, 7:4. For in 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance and thing that I have made I will destroy, blot out, and wipe from the face of the earth. So there we go. We got the 7 again, 7 days. So there's some significance there. 40 days, 40 nights. There's probably some significance to that number as well. But we don't necessarily need to know the in-depth purpose of every single line in the Bible to have an understanding. It's one of those things that you know, there's a surface level understanding, and there's a deeper level understanding, and then you keep digging and you get deeper, and there's just more there the more you dig. And that's why a lot of people have studied. I mean, there's people that have spent their whole lives studying Genesis, and even just the first couple of chapters of it in the creation is because the more you dig, the more you find, and there's a lot to it. But I think in many cases, having an understanding of the big picture of like the whole Bible or the whole book is probably of a greater value than to get really deep into something, especially when you're first starting out. You don't need to go that far. We can just kind of cover more chapters and kind of see the big picture, and we can focus in on something to a higher degree of detail at a later date. And if there's anything that you're really into, there's lots of videos and commentaries on different minute points. It's like, well, what's clean and what's unclean, and 7 animals, animal kinds, types of animals. How many is there? And then it's like, well, how many animals were there on the ark? And well, how do we define animals and animal kinds? And like I was saying before in the last episode, well, so you got a dog, and then you got the different dog breeds, and then you got wolves, which are kind of like a type of dog. And it's like, well, what did they have to put on the ark? Was there only 2 dogs? And then after they got off the ark, they kind of split off, and you got your Yorkshire Terriers, your wolves, and your Great Danes and Chihuahuas. Like, how does that all go about? And it's like, oh, you can kind of look through here, and that kind of came around then, and the different time spans and different areas. And yeah, sometimes animals are the same. It's just they've been in different environments for however many hundreds or thousands of years, and they just are a little bit different, right? I mean, there was the Japanese wolf, which is now extinct, and then there was like the wolves in Europe, and then there was wolves over in the New World. I live in the land of Canada, and I'm pretty sure our wolves are a little bit different than the ones in Russia. I don't think either of them are very friendly, and you wouldn't want to have lunch with one or be eaten as lunch, but that's besides the point, right? But that's just kind of how things are, right? I mean, you're limited on time, so you can study what you want and get into what you want, and there is rewards for going into there and having a deeper level of understanding, but we're just kind of doing a light pass, scratch pass, for I do not know enough to do a deep pass. Where are we? Genesis 7:5. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. So there we go. We got Noah being obedient to the Lord, following what he said to do, and did all that he commanded. So that means that he was successful. He was successful in, getting the right animals on the boat. Successful in the sense of building the boat to the level of specifications as declared previously. Using the gopher wood. Although he did have two choices of lumber to use, and I mean, he maybe used both. Maybe both types of trees were growing in the same area, but he had this gopher wood. Genesis 7:6. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth or land. So he was 600 years old. I mean, it doesn't mean that on his birthday that necessarily happened. It could have been in his 600th year of life. Doesn't really make a huge difference, but maybe it does. Genesis 7:7. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with them went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. So here we go. We got them going in there, going into the boat, because it's flooding, right? So they're not all packed in before the flood that they, I mean, I guess they could have been, but it kind of, like, from the way this sounds, is that, they saw the flood coming and they all kind of packed in. So it was kind of like a last minute thing. I don't think they could have packed everything in a month ahead of time and had all these animals. It's like you pack them in, they got the whatever food supplies they had, so it's not like they had enough of an excess to have all the food and whatever for months ahead of time, that they had them all packed in the year before or months before or weeks before, that it was kind of, they get all their food in there, they had it all stored away, then they had to bring all the animals in, and here we go. Genesis 7:8. Of the clean animals and of the animals that are not clean, and of the birds and fowls, and of everything that creepeth on the ground. 7:9. They went in 2 by 2 with Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God has commanded Noah. So they probably went in 2 by 2 with Noah, like he probably escorted each individual pairing in. It's almost like a checklist, right? Okay, there we go. We got the wolves, we got the bears, we got the lions, the cattle, the deers, whatever other kinds there were that they were bringing in. And it talks about these creepeth things. So, was there bugs, or were they like lizards, or how was that? Because there is certainly animals, or sorry, I should say bugs or whatever, that like have eggs or whatever that could probably survive a flood. They would like float on the water, or clumps of ground would kind of float up, and then the bugs would be in there, and they were preserved. I don't know if he like deliberately tried to preserve the mosquito, but the mosquitoes survived. It would have been nice if they were gone, but that's just kind of how that works. And whether or not those were declared as part of the creeping things, or was that a creeping thing, but some of these other lizards, right, like iguanas and stuff, they probably couldn't survive, and they had to be put on the boat And there's probably some sort of like parental super iguana type of thing that after the flood or whatever kind of descended into all these other types of lizards. It was probably a much more robust kind of lizard thing, and not that it had to be under like a specific heat lamp or something due to its weakness and environmental condition, that it's so specialized that it had no survivability outside of its designated environment. So there was probably stronger kinds of animals as far as their survivability goes before the degradation and the splitting of races and the much more harsh environment that occurred after the flood. So there's that. I mean, people lived to 1,000 years pretty much. So I mean, everything, even the animals, were probably a lot stronger and more resilient then. That they didn't necessarily need to have temperature controlled rooms in their wooden ark. Like, I don't think they would have had the technology to be like a pet store, right? It's like, oh, you got all the heating lamps, so whatever. And they're going in two by two. He's checking them off. He's making sure he has them all because, you know, God commanded him to, and he's gonna make sure he does everything to the letter that God commands him due to his level of care. What were his sons doing? I'm sure his sons probably helped out making the boat, but maybe they didn't. Maybe Noah made it alone, and he just, you know, called his kids up. They were having a barbecue and brought them in. Of course, they didn't eat meat back then, so they were having barbecued mushrooms and peppers. So things could have been different there. But whether or not they helped him make the ark or not, I don't know. But he was commanded to make it, and how he got it done, it doesn't specify. So. And after, Genesis 7:10. And after 7 days, the flood waters came upon the earth or the land. So there we go. We have the flood coming. They're all loaded up in. So maybe they're loaded up and it starts raining, and, you know, it took them a week to pack everything in. I don't know how exactly that all went down. And there was everybody that, you know, probably saw him making the ark, and, you know, there's always those people knocking on the door of the ark trying to get in, but I don't know if that was the case. They probably didn't realize that the ark would even float, and they had no idea what he was doing building this thing because it never rained at that point in time. I'm sure it was just panic and chaos as everybody's just losing their mind, seeing this water come down, and then losing their mind again when they realize it's starting to pile up. Right? It's one thing to experience the rain; it's quite another to have it coming up, and it's probably like a real storm too. It's probably lightning and stuff, and just total chaos, pandemonium. Genesis 7:11. 7:11, what a number. In the year 600 of Noah's life, in the 17th day of the second month, that same day, the fountains of the great deep were broken up and burst forth, and the windows and the floodgates of the heaven were open. So here we go. We got this crazy underground water blowing up, and we got water from the heavens. And the windows and the floodgates of heaven were open up. Yeah, so they've got water from above, water from below. So we got flooding from groundwater, flooding from above, and just total chaos. And it does specify in the 17th day of the second month, right? So we do know what its point of his 600th, year of his life is. That's now specified. We were wondering about that earlier, but the answer was now given. And it rained upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So I wonder, what was the ratio of the rain water to the fountains of the deep blowing up? Was it like we had like just water shooting out of the ground and just loading everything up, and it just kept raining the whole time? Like, or was it mostly from the downpour from above? Doesn't really specify. Not that that really makes any difference, but just one of those questions that I have that doesn't really lead anywhere. We do that from time to time. Genesis 7:13. On the very same day, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the three wives of his sons with them went into the ark. So there we go. We got the flood going on. We got the fountains blowing open, fountains of the deep, and they're all hiding in the ark. Genesis 7:14. They and every wild beast according to its kind, and all livestock according to their kind, every moving thing that creepeth on the land according to its kind, and the fowls according to its kind, every winged thing of every sort. 7:15. And they went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, which there were that breathed the spirit of life. So that's how you could probably exclude some of the bugs, is that they don't breathe in the same way. Maybe there's some sort of depth to that they didn't necessarily need the mosquitoes to be on the ark. But I mean, how are you gonna have animals on there without having bugs that they're just like attached to them? So I don't know. Anyway, they were all on the ark anyway. Necessarily all necessary. Genesis 7:16. And they that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God commanded Noah. And the Lord shut him in and closed the door round about him. So there we go. They all packed in like a jar of sardines. Can of sardines? Can of fish, where they're just packed in right to the brim. And God had to close the door because it was just so packed in. Well, maybe there was still room, but he sealed the door, preventing it from being open, and sealed them in kind of as a he made sure everything was in there and closed the door behind them, right? So nothing was left out, because God was the one closing the door. You don't close the door if not everybody is in. And when you have a divine entity such as the Lord, he's able to make sure that everyone's in that needs to be in there. It's pretty good. Genesis 7:17. The flood, that is the downpour of rain, was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it was lifted high above the land. So there we go. We got the water coming down, lifting the boat up. The boat doesn't have Yamaha propellers on the back of it. It just kind of stays bobbing around in the water, maybe moving around, maybe not, just kind of floating around in there. But everything else that wasn't on the ark, it's not gonna end so well. Genesis 7:18. The waters became mighty and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went gently floating upon the surface of the water. So there we go. Nice comfort being rocked about in the lovely ark. And the waters prevailed. Genesis 7:19. And the waters prevailed so exceedingly and were so mighty upon the earth that all the high hills under the whole sky were covered. Well, there we go. That's a lot of water. Now, the land and the mountains and stuff, there's a lot of people that talk about, well, maybe the earth was more flat at that point in time, that if the world was more flat before all the mountains and stuff, that they weren't as high and it was easier to cover them in water, and then we get all the plates shifting around afterwards. Maybe when the fountains of the deep broke open and shot all that water out, that's when some of these mountains and stuff were created that were a lot higher, like the Himalayas and whatever. But a lot of that's kind of speculation. We don't really necessarily know, but a lot of people that really dig into Genesis, they get into all this really cool stuff and ideas of how some of this stuff probably went down, and it's really quite interesting. The same with like the creation of like fossil fuels and stuff, and you get like this rapid flooding, and then it's just like crushing all the biomatter together in certain locations, and then the ground goes on top of it, and then because of the way it isolates, that it can create some of these like fossil fuel type things, whether they're plant matter, animal matter, or whatever. A lot of it's kind of interesting. Also, pretty sure that the term fossil fuels is kind of wrong as far as describing what it is. That just kind of fits together with some of the models, and that's just kind of what we call it. But whether or not that is what it is or isn't, you'll have to find out for yourself, or at least come to whatever decision you decide to on such a thing, because it's really hard to know exactly what happened at that juncture in time, because we don't really have the details of it in depth in the Bible, and a lot of the stuff that we do as far as like carbon dating and stuff is not accurate enough to really be able to tell a lot of things. because a lot of those dating systems are based on like kind of constants, and we don't necessarily know if everything is kind of like how it is now. You know, thousands of years ago, maybe there was differences, and that would, you know, it's like, well, it's only accurate within 5,000 years. It's like, well, if the world's not much older than that, it's like, well, then you're not accurate at all, right? So there's a lot of problems that way, and it's not really good to trust a lot of those things um, so greatly. It's a lot easier, like, to date something from like 100 years ago when it's like, well, you know, we had the nuclear weapon testing or whatever, and then you can look at the whatever isotopes and like the forming of different things and whatever those isotopes when they were introduced, and we can kind of figure stuff out that way. But that's a much shorter time span, and we know of kind of the big things that could affect that, right? Whereas we don't really know exactly what was going on at that point in time. Maybe they had nuclear power in Noah's day, right? Like, we don't know that they didn't. And I mean, when people live a lot longer, and they were probably had, you know, really good memories because they were in really good health. It's like, imagine what one person can accomplish in a lifetime of 800 years, and having multiple generations being able to take, you know, what they're doing and kind of advance it as well. I mean, we could have had a lot of technology back then, and it just got wiped out in the flood. So it's hard to say exactly what was going on there, but to make the assumption that everybody was stupid in the past and they've never really accomplished anything, I think is kind of foolhardy. And even you look at some of the inventions before the internet era, like a lot of governors and steam engines, and it's like they're amazing in how they work and very creative. At the intelligence of humans is quite tremendous. But a lot of times it kind of gets wiped out, right? Like if a society falls, all the technology and all the literature dies with them. So we don't really know how far along they were back then, but it could have been a very technical society. Maybe they even made the pyramids. Or was it aliens? Could this be? Could this be? Genesis 7:20. In fact, the waters became 15 cubits higher as the high hills were covered. So not only is it covering all the mountains, it's 15 cubits higher, which is a lot. 7:21. And all flesh ceased to breathe that moved upon the face of the earth, the fowls and the birds, animals and wild beasts, all swarming and creeping things that swarm and creep upon the land, and all mankind. So all the fish were probably fine. I mean, I guess there's that whole saltwater, freshwater thing, but maybe it was all freshwater then, and we didn't get saltwater till later. But I've never heard anyone talk about that before, so that could just be, I could be completely wrong on that, but that might be an interesting thing. And then it could be like, oh, well, the water became more salty because the fountains cracked open, and then that introduced that, and then that the gradual shifting allowed animals to switch. Because there's like freshwater crocodiles and saltwater crocodiles, and you put the wrong one in the wrong kind, and it explodes. So there's obviously some level of granularity between them. So maybe there's something more in depth that way, and especially with like the sea currents and whatever. So it's a very different world at that juncture in time, and I don't know. It's interesting to think about and like philosophically look at what could have happened, but in reality, we don't know exactly, and we can kind of H word. Hypothesize what was going on, but you know, we can just kind of go with what the Word of God says, and kind of, you know, take a guess and see if the evidence supports your guess, right? Like, that's all you can really do. It's too long ago to actually go there to have a first-hand account, but we do have all the evidence of what is in the earth and where the fossils are and everything to try to understand what was going on at that time period. But we are more concerned with today. That's where we are now, living in the now. Genesis 7:22. Everything on the dry land whose nostrils were in the breath of life and spirit of life died. Yeah, okay, so there's the line with nostrils. That was what I remember reading about before, was that if it doesn't have nostrils, maybe it's not considered life enough to place on the ark. So, anyway, if you had nostrils and you breathe the spirit of life, you're dead. You want to be on the boat. You want to be with the group that God has selected to survive, because that's the better path to be in. Genesis 7:23, and God destroyed, blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the earth, man and animals and the creeping things, and the birds of the heavens were destroyed, blotted out from the land. Only Noah remained alive, and those who were with him in the ark. There we go. The survival was for a few, but they survived due to the righteousness of Noah and God, taking them out, preserving them, so that they would survive the judgment. Genesis 7:24, and the waters prevailed upon the earth or land for 150 days, 5 months. Pretty long time, long enough for anyone that, maybe they had a piece of wood and they were hanging on it, and they survived the flood and they're floating on the top of the water. Well, you're not going to get any food out there. You're going to die, right? Like, so anyone that would have survived, right? I mean, that's probably why the flood had to go on so long, was to make sure that everybody that God destined for the judgment was eliminated, right? And some people, maybe with their technology, I mean, never experiencing a rain or a flood and having no concept of that style of attack to occur, would have no ability to prepare for it. But maybe there was people that survived a couple months or whatever with their ingenuity, but it wasn't long enough. They would have starved or dehydrated or whatever, right? Like, maybe it was like salty or the contaminated water or whatever, not stuff you'd want to drink. So they're all wiped out. God needed enough time to really wipe them out, in 5 months. 150 days was enough time for that. And we are at the end of Genesis 7. So stay tuned for next time when we move forward into Genesis 8. Ciao.